A waitress secretly fed a quiet boy every day one morning, for SUVs pulled up to her diner. Why would a waitress risk her job feeding a poor, quiet boy everyone else scorned? You won't believe the stunning secret about who this boy really was, or the jaw-dropping arrival of 4 black SUVs that changed everything in her small-town diner. Like, subscribe, and listen now to hear the incredible, full story of kindness, courage, and unexpected heroes. The familiar morning bustle of Sullivan's diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of bacon, the low murmur of town gossip abruptly ceased. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence. Outside, on the rain-slicked main street of Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, for gleaming black SUVs had pulled up, their tinted windows and imposing presence utterly alien against the backdrop of faded storefronts. They weren't police vehicles, nor anything typically seen in this quiet corner of the state. Doors opened in unison, and 8 figures emerged, moving with disciplined precision. They wore crisp, dark uniforms, insignias glinting subtly even in the overcast morning light. Military, the serious, unsmiling demeanor of the men, their focused way of scanning their surroundings, sent a ripple of unease through the diner's patrons peering through the large front window. The lead figure, tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair cut short and the bearing of command, pushed open the diner door, the bell above it jingling incongruously. He stepped inside, followed closely by his men, their polished boots unervingly silent on the worn linoleum floor. The smell of coffee and frying onions seemed to momentarily hold its breath. Every eye was fixed on the newcomers. They didn't look like they were here for pancakes. The colonel, his rank clear on his collar, swept his gaze across the room, past the curious faces, past the counter where waitresses stood frozen, until his eyes landed on booth 7 in the far corner. He nodded slightly, a silent order given, and began walking purposefully towards it. What was happening? Who were these men? And who, or what, were they looking for in this ordinary small-town diner? The air thickened with unspoken questions and a sudden, palpable tension. For Jenny Carter, 32, Sullivan's diner wasn't just a job. It was the steady rhythm of her life in Willow Grove. 6 days a week, she tied her brown hair back in a high ponytail, donned her practical apron, and navigated the familiar landscape of vinyl booths, Formica countertops, and steaming coffee pots. She knew most customers by name, remembered their usual orders, and offered a genuine, easy smile that could brighten even the dreariest Pennsylvania morning. "What can I get for you today, hon?" "Let Jenny take care of you," was her standard greeting, delivered with warmth that felt increasingly rare in the world. Willow Grove was a town like many others scattered across the state, built on industries that had seen better days, populated by hard-working families, and bound by a tight-knit, sometimes stifling, sense of community where everyone knew everyone else's business. The diner, owned by the perpetually stressed but generally decent Mark Sullivan, was a local institution, a place for early morning coffee clatches, hurried lunches, and Friday night fish fries. It offered predictability, comfort food, and a sense of belonging, something Jenny valued deeply. Jenny herself lived a simple life. She rented a small apartment above the town library, drove a sputtering decade-old car, and carefully budgeted her modest waitress earnings. She wasn't saving for anything grand, just enough to feel secure, maybe take a community college course someday. There was a quiet sadness about her sometimes, hints of past struggles she didn't readily share, but it was overlaid with a resilient optimism and a deep wellspring of empathy. Her mother, gone now several years, had instilled in her a core belief. "Kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you give it away, Jenny. It's how you keep faith alive when times are tough." Lurking in the background of Willow Grove's daily life was Vincent Harding, a local businessman who had inherited wealth and parlayed it into ownership of various properties and enterprises around town. Harding moved with an air of entitlement, quick to sneer at those he considered beneath him, always looking for opportunities to expand his holdings, often at the expense of others. He was a frequent, though unwelcome, presence at the diner, holding court in a corner booth, making condescending remarks just loud enough to be overheard. Jenny, like many others, endured his presence with polite, strained tolerance. Life in Willow Grove continued its familiar cadence, unaware that the arrival of a silent, hungry child was about to disrupt its equilibrium and expose the tensions simmering just beneath the surface. It started on a crisp Tuesday morning in early autumn 2022. Amidst the usual breakfast rush, Jenny noticed him slip into booth 7, the one near the back by the rattling window air conditioner. He was small for his age, maybe 10. She guessed thin and swallowed by a worn, oversized jacket despite the lingering warmth inside the diner. His hair was unkempt, his eyes large and dark, holding a weary, watchful quality that seemed too old for his young face. He clutched a battered backpack on his lap, as if it contained all his worldly possessions. When Jenny approached with her usual cheerful greeting, he flinched almost imperceptibly. Just a glass of water, please," he mumbled, his voice barely audible, avoiding her eyes. There were no adults with him. He looked hungry, not just peckish, but hollowed-out hungry. Jenny's heart gave a painful lurch. She brought him the water, then hesitated. Company policy was clear: no freebies unless Mr. Sullivan approved. But looking at the boy's thin wrists, the way his eyes darted towards the plates of food being delivered to other tables, policy felt suddenly irrelevant. "Hey," she said softly, leaning down slightly. "Looks like the kitchen made some extra toast this morning. It's on the house. Eat up before it gets cold." She placed a small plate with 2 slices of buttered toast in front of him before he could protest. The boy looked up at her, surprised, then down at the toast. He didn't say thank you, just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and began eating with a quiet intensity that confirmed Jenny's suspicion. He ate every crumb, drank his water, and then slipped out as silently as he had arrived, leaving only the empty plate and glass behind. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Always the same routine. Slip into booth 7, ask only for water, nurse it slowly. And each morning, Jenny found a reason to bring him something extra: a small bowl of oatmeal, a couple of sausage links left over from another order, a handful of cookies the baker accidentally burned slightly. She paid for the items herself when necessary, ringing them up discreetly as miscellaneous add-ons to other checks or using her own tip money, careful not to draw the attention of Mark Sullivan or the other waitresses. Her initial goal was simple, instinctual: to ease the immediate hunger of a child who clearly needed help. Her reaction was driven purely by compassion, a knee-jerk response to vulnerability. Why he was alone, why he was hungry, she didn't know yet. She only knew she couldn't stand by and watch him starve while she served plates piled high with food. She didn't think about consequences or complications. She just acted, putting a plate of food in front of a hungry boy, offering a small measure of comfort in his seemingly difficult world. It was a simple act of kindness, the beginning of a quiet conspiracy between waitress and child. The quiet boy became a fixture in Jenny's early morning routine. She started calling him Adam in her head, long before she knew his actual name, simply because he felt like he needed one. He'd arrive like clockwork around 7 a.m., just before the main breakfast rush hit, and just before school likely started, sliding into booth 7, always requesting only water. And Jenny would bring him something more substantial, paid for out of her own pocket, rung up under codes she hoped Mr. Sullivan wouldn't scrutinize too closely. Slowly, cautiously, a fragile connection formed. Adam rarely spoke more than a few words, but he started making eye contact, offering Jenny shy, fleeting smiles. He began accepting the food less hesitantly, his initial suspicion replaced by a quiet gratitude that tugged at Jenny's heart. She learned fragments about him through patient, gentle questioning that never pushed too hard. His name was indeed Adam Walsh. His mother had left town months ago, after his father, a soldier, had been killed overseas Afghanistan, he thought. He lived with his grandmother, who was old and sick and relied on a small disability check that often ran out before the end of the month, leaving the pantry bare. School lunch helped, but breakfast and dinner were uncertain. Jenny's secret charity didn't go entirely unnoticed. Sarah Jenkins, another waitress who often worked the morning shift, a no-nonsense woman a few years older than Jenny, with a quiet competence Jenny admired, saw what was happening. Sarah didn't comment directly, but she occasionally accidentally left half a pot of coffee near Jenny's station or forgot an extra side of hash browns near booth 7, giving Jenny a knowing look that conveyed silent support. Others were less charitable. Regular customers started whispering, "Why is Jenny wasting food on that kid? He looks like trouble. Bet he's stealing that backpack full of stuff." The judgment stung, but Jenny ignored it, focusing on Adam's quiet presence. Vincent Harding, the town's self-important businessman, made his disapproval known more overtly. Spotting Jenny setting down a plate of scrambled eggs for Adam one morning, he called out across the diner, his voice dripping with scorn, "Still feeding the strays, Jenny? You'll bring rats into the place. Oughta call the county on him." Jenny felt her face flush, but she turned, meeting Harding's smirk with a level gaze. "Everyone deserve a little kindness, Mr. Harding," she said evenly, though her hands were trembling slightly. Harding just laughed and turned back to his newspaper. The cost of the food, though consisting of simple diner staples, began to add up, eating into Jenny's already tight budget. She started packing simpler lunches for herself, skipping her own coffee breaks. Mark Sullivan, preoccupied with rising supply costs and thinning profit margins, hadn't seemed to notice yet, but Jenny felt a constant low-level anxiety that he would discover her secret and put a stop to it, or worse, fire her. Despite the complications, the cost, the judgment, the risk to her job, Jenny couldn't bring herself to stop. Seeing Adam eat, seeing the slight easing of tension in his shoulders, the occasional flicker of a genuine smile, felt necessary, important. One morning, after finishing a plate of pancakes Jenny had brought him, Adam shyly slid a small, folded piece of notebook paper across the table before slipping out. Jenny unfolded it. In careful, childish handwriting, it read, "Thank you, Miss Jenny. I will pay you back someday. Adam W." Jenny carefully tucked the note into her apron pocket, her heart aching with a mix of sadness and hope. The stakes felt higher now. This wasn't just about food. It was about trust, about keeping a promise unspoken between them. The turning point arrived subtly, embedded in one of their quiet morning exchanges a few months after Adam first appeared. Jenny had brought him a more substantial breakfast: bacon, eggs, and grits, noticing he looked thinner than usual, the autumn chill penetrating his worn jacket. As he ate, Jenny sat across from him for a rare moment, polishing silverware, creating an excuse to linger. "Your dad was a soldier?" Jenny asked gently, picking up on the thread he'd mentioned weeks earlier. Adam nodded, swallowing a mouthful of grits. "Yeah, he was important, Grandma says. Special Forces." He looked down at his plate. "Major David Walsh. That was his name." The name, spoken with quiet pride despite the sadness, hung in the air. Special Forces. Major David Walsh. It felt significant, adding a layer of specific, tragic heroism to Adam's quiet hardship. Jenny murmured words of sympathy, respecting the weight of his loss. Later that morning, during a lull, Jenny mentioned the conversation to Sarah Jenkins as they refilled napkin dispensers. That poor kid, Adam. Turns out his dad was Special Forces. Major David Walsh died in Afghanistan. Sarah stopped what she was doing, her expression shifting. David Walsh? She repeated, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I think I might know that name. From my time in the Army. Sarah rarely talked about her past, but Jenny knew she'd served before waitressing. Special Forces out of Fort Bragg. Jenny wasn't sure, but Sarah seemed suddenly galvanized. Let me make a call later, Sarah said quietly, her tone serious. There are networks. Ways to check. If he's Major Walsh's kid, he shouldn't be living like this. There are support systems. This revelation, Adam's specific identity and his father's military sacrifice, fundamentally shifted Jenny's understanding. Adam wasn't just a hungry local kid. He was the son of a fallen hero, potentially overlooked by the very systems designed to support him. The goal subtly changed from simply providing immediate relief to potentially connecting Adam and his grandmother with more substantial, long-term help. Simultaneously, Vincent Harding's machinations intensified. He began making overtures to Mark Sullivan about buying the diner property, citing its untapped potential for a strip mall. Harding also started dropping pointed comments to Mark about Jenny, twisting her kindness towards Adam into something suspicious. You sure she's not skimming from the register, Mark? Harding suggested one afternoon, loud enough for other staff to overhear. Giving away free food like that? Where's the money coming from? Makes you wonder. Mark, already stressed about finances, looked troubled. He hadn't confronted Jenny directly yet, but the seed of doubt planted by Harding was beginning to take root. Jenny now faced a two-front battle, continuing her secret support for Adam while navigating the increasing suspicion fueled by Harding's slander. Learning Adam's identity and Sarah's potential military connection offered a glimmer of hope for real help, but it also felt like a point of no return. The secret was becoming more complex, the stakes higher. Jenny's simple act of kindness was now entangled with military legacies and malicious local politics, pushing her towards a confrontation she hadn't sought but could no longer avoid. Sarah Jenkins was true to her word. Leveraging connections from her time in Army logistics and tapping into veterans' online forums, she discreetly inquired about Major David Walsh. Confirmation came back within days. Major Walsh was a highly decorated Green Beret, killed in action in 2021, leaving behind a young son, Adam, and an elderly mother as next of kin. Records indicated survivor benefits were being sent, but the address listed was outdated. The system hadn't caught up with Adam and his grandmother's move to Willow Grove after losing their previous home. Armed with this information, Sarah reached out through official channels, contacting Major Walsh's former unit liaison officer. She explained the situation carefully. The Major's son was living in poverty, apparently having slipped through the cracks of the support system, and was being sustained daily by the quiet charity of a local waitress named Jenny Carter. She also mentioned the local businessman, Harding, who seemed intent on harassing Jenny, potentially jeopardizing her job and, indirectly, Adam's only reliable source of food. The liaison officer promised to elevate the information immediately to the unit command, specifically mentioning Colonel John Ramsey, Major Walsh's former commander and close friend. While this potential lifeline was being cast, the situation at the diner grew more precarious for Jenny. Vincent Harding, frustrated by Mark Sullivan's reluctance to sell, escalated his campaign. He began manufacturing evidence, altering old supply invoices to make it look like diner inventory was consistently short on Jenny's shifts, subtly implying theft. He complained loudly to Mark about Jenny spending too much time chatting up that dirty kid instead of serving paying customers. Mark Sullivan, caught between Harding's relentless pressure and his own financial anxieties, finally confronted Jenny. "Jenny," he said awkwardly one afternoon, avoiding her eyes, "Mr. Harding has raised some concerns. About inventory, about time management. I need you to make sure all food is accounted for. No more freebies, understand? Not even burnt toast. And maybe discourage that boy from hanging around so much. It makes some customers uncomfortable." Jenny felt a cold dread. Mark didn't accuse her directly, but the warning was clear. Her job was on the line. Harding's poison was working. She felt trapped, wondering if her attempts to help Adam had inadvertently put both of them in a worse position. It was Adam himself who provided the unexpected counterweapon. A few days after Mark's warning, Adam arrived looking troubled. He waited until Jenny brought him his usual, a smaller portion now, just toast she paid for up front, and slid another folded note across the table. This one wasn't a thank you. It contained a cheap, old flip phone his grandmother's. "Mr. Harding," Adam whispered, his eyes wide. "He was talking loud near my table yesterday, talking to another man about you. About the diner. He said," Adam swallowed hard, "he said you giving me food proves you steal money. Said he'd make Mr. Sullivan fire you, then Mr. Sullivan would have to sell the diner to him. He said it all." Adam tapped the phone. I pressed the button, like Grandma showed me. To record. Jenny stared at the phone, then at Adam. The 10-year-old boy, in his quiet way, had captured Harding boasting about his scheme. She immediately took the phone to Sarah Jenkins during their break. Together, they listened to the muffled but clear recording. Harding outlining his plan to frame Jenny, force Mark's hand, and snatch up the diner property for his development project. They now had concrete proof of Harding's malicious intent. Their goal crystallized: protect Jenny's job and reputation, expose Harding's scheme, and ensure Adam's safety and well-being, ideally with the help Sarah had sought. They regrouped, making a secure copy of Adam's recording, gathering the falsified invoices Sarah suspected Harding had planted, and waited, hoping Colonel Ramsey's unit would respond before Harding could inflict irreversible damage. The power dynamic had shifted slightly. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were armed with truth, preparing for a showdown. The days following Adam's revelation were fraught with tension. Jenny continued working at the diner, acutely aware of Mark Sullivan's watchful eyes and Vincent Harding's smug presence. Harding seemed confident his plan was working, occasionally making pointed remarks about loyalty and trustworthiness within earshot of Mark and Jenny. Jenny performed her duties with meticulous care, ensuring every order was correct, every dollar accounted for, knowing Harding was likely looking for any excuse to escalate his accusations. Sarah Jenkins worked discreetly in the background. She managed to find copies of the original supply invoices Harding had likely altered, highlighting the discrepancies. She kept the recording from Adam's phone safe, along with her documentation of Harding's previous complaints against Jenny. She also maintained quiet contact with a military liaison, who confirmed Colonel Ramsey was aware and monitoring the situation, though the timing and nature of any intervention remained uncertain. This uncertainty weighed heavily on Jenny. What if the military didn't come? What if Mark fired her before they could act? What would happen to Adam then? She endured sleepless nights, worrying about her future, about the boy she'd grown to care for so deeply. This was her personal dark night of the soul. Had her simple act of kindness unleashed forces she couldn't control? Was Harding simply too powerful, too entrenched in the town's structure, to be taken down by a waitress, a former soldier, and a 10-year-old boy with a recording? Harding, sensing victory was near, made his next move. He formally presented Mark Sullivan with a lowball offer to buy the diner property, contingent on resolving the current staffing issues, a thinly veiled reference to firing Jenny. He coupled the offer with manufactured evidence of Jenny's alleged shortages, likely based on the doctored invoices. "Face it, Mark," Harding said patronizingly, meeting him at the diner one afternoon. "The place is barely breaking even. Your problematic waitress is driving away customers and probably stealing you blind. Take my offer, cut your losses. It's the smart move." Mark looked cornered, distressed. He glanced towards Jenny, who was clearing tables nearby, trying not to listen. He didn't agree immediately, but the pressure was immense. That evening, Jenny and Sarah met after their shift. "He's going to fire me, Sarah," Jenny said, her voice trembling slightly. Harding's got him backed into a corner. "Not yet. He hasn't," Sarah said firmly. "We have Adam's recording. We have the invoice proof. If the colonel doesn't show up by Saturday morning, we take this straight to Mark ourselves. And if Mark won't listen, we take it to the local paper, maybe even the police for the fraud." Their final preparations involved bracing themselves for this possibility, a direct confrontation with Mark, potentially alienating him further, or going public and facing Harding's wrath directly. They organized their evidence, made contingency plans. They had to trust in the truth and in the possibility that help would arrive, while preparing to fight the battle alone if necessary. The stakes were absolute: Jenny's livelihood, Adam's fragile stability, the diner's future, and the chance to expose Harding's corruption. The breaking point was imminent. Saturday morning arrived gray and tense. The diner was moderately busy, but an undercurrent of uncertainty hung in the air. Mark Sullivan avoided Jenny's eyes. Jenny and Sarah exchanged anxious glances, their agreed-upon deadline looming. Then, just before 9 a.m., the engine rumble began, growing louder, culminating in the synchronized arrival of the 4 black SUVs. The diner fell silent as Colonel John Ramsey and his 7 men entered, their imposing presence filling the space. Ramsey's eyes scanned the room, landing first on a wide-eyed Adam Walsh, who was sitting in booth 7, nursing a glass of milk Jenny had quietly provided. Ramsey walked directly towards him. "Adam Walsh?" the colonel asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Adam nodded mutely. Ramsey knelt beside the booth. "I'm Colonel Ramsey. I served with your father, Major David Walsh. He was a great man, a hero. We haven't forgotten him. Were you?" He then looked across at Jenny, who stood frozen nearby, tray in hand. "And you must be Jenny Carter." Jenny could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. "MS. Carter," Ramsey stood, his voice ringing through the silent diner. "My unit, the men who served alongside Major Walsh, owe you a debt of gratitude. We understand you've been looking out for his son, providing him with food and kindness when he needed it most. On behalf of his unit, his brothers in arms, thank you." A collective gasp went through the diner patrons. Mark Sullivan stared, dumbfounded. Vincent Harding's smug expression vanished, replaced by disbelief, then dawning panic. "But it seems," Ramsey continued, his gaze hardening as it swept towards Harding, "that MS. Carter's kindness has been met with malice and deceit." He nodded towards Adam. Adam, emboldened by the colonel's presence, stood up, holding the small flip phone. "Mister, Harding said bad things about Miss Jenny," Adam said, his voice clearer than Jenny had ever heard it. "He wanted her fired so he could buy the diner. I heard him. He fumbled slightly, then pressed play. Harding's voice, outlining his scheme to frame Jenny, filled the diner. As the recording ended, Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, holding up documents. "And this is proof," she announced, "that Mr. Harding falsified invoices to support his lies about Jenny." Harding lunged forward, sputtering, "It's fake. All lies. That kid dash." "Enough, Harding," Mark Sullivan finally roared, finding his voice, his face flushed with anger at the betrayal. "I've heard enough. Get out of my diner. You're finished here." Colonel Ramsey made a quiet call. Minutes later, 2 uniformed Willow Grove police officers entered. After briefly conferring with Ramsey, reviewing Sarah's documents, and listening to Adam's recording again, they approached a cornered, sputtering Vincent Harding. "Mr. Harding," one officer said calmly, "you need to come with us." Harding was led away, his reign of petty tyranny over. Jenny watched, tears streaming down her face, not just from relief, but from the overwhelming validation of simple kindness. Vincent Harding's arrest, based on Adam's recording and Sarah's evidence of fraud and slander, led to a conviction and a short prison sentence, effectively ending his influence in Willow Grove. The attempted hostile takeover of Sullivan's Diner was thwarted. Colonel Ramsey and his unit did more than just thank Jenny. Moved by her selfless actions and Adam's plight, they pooled personal funds and tapped into unit benevolent associations, presenting Mark Sullivan with a check for $50,000. "Use it to secure the diner's future," Ramsey instructed, "and maybe continue the kindness Jenny started." Mark, deeply humbled and grateful, used the funds not just for needed renovations, but to establish a permanent community table program at the diner, offering free, nutritious meals daily to local children in need. No questions asked. He insisted on naming the back corner booth Jenny's Table in her honor. Jenny kept her job, her reputation restored, and her value recognized. She became instrumental in running the community table program. With organizational help from Sarah Jenkins and seed money from the military unit's donation, she established Adam's Hope, a small foundation providing emergency food, aid, and educational support for local children, particularly those from military or low-income families. Adam and his grandmother were finally connected with the full spectrum of military survivor benefits and support networks, ensuring their financial stability and access to better health care. Though they eventually moved closer to a military base with better resources for his grandmother, Adam remained fiercely devoted to Jenny, calling her weekly and visiting Willow Grove often. Sullivan's Diner transformed from a struggling small-town eatery into a true community hub, known not just for its coffee and pies, but for its compassion. Jenny Carter, the quiet waitress, became a local hero, not for any single grand act, but for the cumulative power of small kindnesses offered without expectation. Sitting at Jenny's table one afternoon, watching children happily eating free meals, she reflected on her mother's words. Kindness had multiplied, keeping faith alive not just for her, but for Adam and ultimately for the entire town of Willow Grove.